don't let the rejections, if you get them. I once met a person who was like, I've never been rejected. And I was like, I've been rejected a lot. But yeah, don't let them get you down.
Hey everybody, it's Ronnie with Daybreak Star Radio, of course, the only station indigenizing the airwaves. And sitting next to me is one of our amazing production assistants here, Aiyana.
Hi. Yeah, I'm so stoked to be here, and we have a very special guest today. We have the author Darcie Little Badger to discuss some of their books and their process. Darcie, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the great nation you hail from?
Oh yes, hello. Thank you for having me on. I'm Darcie, and I'm from the Lipan Apache tribe of Texas. And yeah, I write fantasy books for young adults. I used to be an oceanographer, but after my first book was published in 2020, I realized that I could finally make a living doing what I've always dreamed of doing, and that was writing stories and sharing them with people.
What first drew you to writing and storytelling in general?
I've always wanted to be a storyteller. And I really credit my parents with that because when I was a baby, they would be like reading me picture books. And my mom, she would tell me stories that don't appear in books or traditional stories. So I was raised in this environment where I just recognized the power of storytelling. And I wanted to do that myself. So I remember even before I knew how to write, I would have construction paper and just be scribbling on it and pretending I was making books. Eventually, my first book, I guess I wrote when I was 7. It was this 40-page mystery about a murdered garden. And from there, I just kept writing up until the point, well, in my 30s, I finally published my book. But really, throughout it all, even though, there was a lot of rejections along the way, it was just the joy of creating stories and that hope that someday they'd be able to connect with other people that kept me going.
Nice. So did you always know, or was it in your mind that you always wanted to center Indigenous identity in your work?
Yeah, I guess in a way I did, but it was kind of subconscious. So for context, on my father's side of the family, I'm Irish American. On my mother's side, I'm Lipan Apache, uh, and I was just raised culturally Lipan Apache, and so it's just me really writing what I know. I did become aware probably when I was a teenager, like when I was young, I'd read everything in the fantasy sci-fi sections. But by the time I was 12, 13, I realized like I'd never read any book with a Lipan character. And the books that I did read that had Native American characters tended to be like historical fiction. There really wasn't much out there. And so that like there's so many parts that make a person's identity, but your culture is so very important. And when something that important is just absent in the fiction that you read, I think that it becomes a little bit eerie. Like it almost felt like an episode of The Twilight Zone where I was walking through a house of mirrors and like not seeing my reflection. So I did realize at some level that it's also important just to represent myself, not just for me, but for other people, other young readers out there who are Native, who are Apache, who are looking for that reflection and just not finding it.
Hmm.
Yeah, and you do a great job incorporating your culture into the book and having that be an element. And you also created your own world. You have an alternate America with its own magic system and fantasy. How long did it take you to create that and come up with that?
So the part about the animal ghost, I'd say I've been doing since I was really young. Like I wrote a short story in high school that was about a haunted house with like a ghost parrot in it. And ever since then I'd been thinking like, what kind of supernatural powers would animal ghosts have? But the rest of the world itself, I'm what's called a pantser. So I do things by the seat of my pants when I'm writing. So I just kind of dove in and I built it along the way. But I would be thinking as I was writing, what kind of world is this? And there was a lot of world building elements that I weren't able to get in the book, but that I just kept in my mind to kind of inform how the characters are reacting. So it was cool that I was able to write a prequel just so that I could add a little bit more of that world building.
So when it comes to your world building, you've also created like a ton of characters, and we're curious, do you have a character you feel most connected to?
So in my second book, A Snake Falls to Earth, there's like this large cast of secondary characters. And I probably feel most connected to, I wish though I could say that I relate the most to Ellie in like a lots of way, just because she's so cool, or Shane and Shannon Lende because she's also cool. But I don't know. I'm working on it. I'm still trying to reach that level.
So you mentioned earlier in your introduction that you studied oceanography. You have a PhD in oceanography, which is incredibly impressive.
You
Do you use anything from that part of your life in your stories, or going through grad school and that form of writing? Do you use that at all when you write your books?
So I have to say that when I was an undergraduate, the reason I got into oceanography was because I wanted to study writing, but they rejected me from the creative writing program. And it was around that time I took an oceanography course, and I just loved it. I loved learning about the world and things that I didn't know before because I lived in landlocked areas. Like even in Texas, I was up in Texarkana. So
Texarkana.
yeah, that was an interesting high school 4 years up there.
I grew up in I grew up in Ozan, Arkansas. We visited
Oh, no way.
Texarkana a
That's
lot.
close. Okay. So you know what it's like there.
Yeah.
It was great, but like we didn't get down to the ocean much. I think we maybe visited Corpus Christi like a couple times. And it was like learning about the world that I realized this kind of informs my fiction in ways, like even if I'm writing fantasy, if I know how, for example, hurricanes become more powerful, I put that into two of my books. In A Snake Falls to Earth, it takes place in the near future Texas, so things like hurricanes are like stronger. There's more droughts, and I'm just using all of my oceanographic background to try to envision what the future might be like. And in Shenelende, which is the prequel to Alatsoe, I write about a hurricane that's based on a historical hurricane that impacted my family's community in the 1970s. It's the one that actually destroyed my mother's home, and led to a series of tragedies that followed with these Lipan rancherias down there. So being able to understand the science behind that, I feel like it does, at least I hope it makes my fiction stronger. And I'm going to continue to like read papers and try to learn about the world, even though I'm not technically a professional scientist right now. I'm not getting paid for doing science or anything.
Sci-fi and fantasy genres, as we said. And so I'm curious, what was it about these two genres that spoke to you as an author?
So I wonder if some of it was my upbringing and some of it is just I just naturally lean towards that as a fan. I'm also a big horror fan, but I write a lot less horror. I like to just keep that uh, just for my fandom because I just want to be a fan in that space. But with like sci-fi fantasy, I kind of like, I'm both like a professional and now I'm also a fan. So it's like great.
What do you hope people take away from reading your books?
I would say the overarching themes that appear in all the books I've written so far, and I'm working on a couple of other books, and this theme is in them too. But I want readers to step away with a sense of hope. Just because like my books definitely do touch upon some dark subjects, like, the loss of family, of homeland, of, all these, especially in Shenelende, there's, trying to survive great tragedies, that natural disasters and disease and all these things. But I think it's so important. When I was teaching oceanography, a lot of the young people, I say young people, they were freshmen in college. They had this sense of almost like there was no future for them. And I found that to be very prevalent. And it's definitely not just restricted to young people. I know a lot of adults feel that way too. If there's no hope, then we lose that drive to act. And it's my belief that I need to be fighting for the best possible version of the future that I can. And I need to give young people that kind of drive to just keep going. I know many times in my family's past, there were situations where things genuinely seemed like overwhelmingly bad. I was like, if they gave up hope, I wouldn't be here today. But I am here. The Lipan are still here, and we're making strides in our rights. And I want young readers to come away from my stories with a sense that this world is here for them and will be here for them, and it's going to be difficult, but they need to fight to survive through that. And it's definitely something that I've personally struggled with, which is why I believe it's so important just to continue putting that hope into my stories. But yeah, I would say that's something that all of them end with, that sense of hope, even though there's definitely bad things that do happen in my books.
How do you work through writer's block when you have it?
Oh, that's a great question. Is one I was just discussing with some like writer friends of mine, and something that we agreed on is a lot of times it's a sign that whatever you're writing, you're dissatisfied with an element or maybe many elements of that story, and you need to just pause and think, what is it about this story that I'm just not feeling? What needs to change? And sometimes it involves rewriting like 50,000 words. And I have done that before. Like, okay, maybe not 50,000. I've rewritten like 30,000 words before. So it can be a lot. It can be a complete change in the direction of the plot. Maybe you need to add a character, just shake things up. But just remember that you control this story. So you don't have to put yourself into a corner where you feel like, oh, I absolutely now have to write this battle scene and I hate writing this battle scene, but I got to get it over with. Like, no, think of a way where you don't have to write that battle scene. Write something else if you're not feeling it. So generally just being kind of thoughtful about what is causing that block helps. But when it doesn't, I do like to just take a step back and just read books, stuff that from authors that I enjoy, even if they might not be writing in my genre or my age group, and it tends to be inspirational.
So what advice would you give to Indigenous youth who also want to be writers and storytellers or anything else in the world?
So one advice that I think this applies to any sort of artistic person, whether they're writing or creating like illustrations or comics and whatever the case, is when people tell you no, don't let that discourage you. Keep creating through the rejections. Definitely some people, just because of who the gatekeepers are in this world, are going to hear no a lot more often than others. And it's so important to keep up that love in your own art, and just whatever it is that made you want to be an artist, just keep that fire burning and keep creating and keep putting yourself out there. It helps to find other like groups of Native writers. I know, for example, there's Indian Girls Book Club is great. They have a Discord group for young writers, places like that where you can support each other. And it's these networks where people build each other up. And I know I used to be like a new writer, and I really benefited from the help of experienced writers. And now I feel like I'm more of an experienced writer. So I'm trying to reach out and help like new writers get into the field. But yeah, find those groups and just like, don't let the rejections, if you get them. I once met a person who was like, I've never been rejected. And I was like, I've been rejected a lot, but yeah, don't let them get you down.
My purpose, my intention was to write a novel that really centered the validity of dreaming. For Nahiawak, for Cree people, dreaming is a central connection to our creation story. You know, we're people who come from the stars, and our connection to that is through dreaming. So literally, dreaming is intertwined with story. You can't have one without the other. For me and for